Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me clearly now?
I
Miss?
can, yeah.
Yeah. So, Miss. So this is my chapter two,
Yeah.
chapter two feedback, right?
Yes, that's right. What I sent you, yeah, with
Yeah.
the
Okay.
notes on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit not understanding about the 2.1. Um, do you recommend me to just remove the whole thing? Because actually I just checked with my chapter one. Yes, I did explain something about this, like similar to
Mm.
prisoners' rights in UK law. So, if I have mentioned in chapter one, so in chapter two, I think we will just remove this part, or should I just re-mention it before, like I mentioned the impact or something?
So I think what I said in the comment is, first of all, do you, in your first chapter, because obviously I haven't seen that, do you kind of go into it in a little bit of detail, so talk about kind of some of the debate about what kind of fundamental rights kind of prisoners have
Um,
in
I don't think I have a debate on that, but I think I've mentioned these two acts, which is the
these two acts
yeah,
before?
yeah,
Okay.
which is the HRA 1998 and the Prison Act 1933.
Yeah. So I think there's an example where fundamental rights. Little think about. Yeah. So I think there's two things then. So I think it might be worth in your first chapter
Mm-hmm.
having a little think about putting a little bit in about
Okay.
to what extent kind of prisoners do kind of keep their fundamental rights. So there is some debate. So there's a lot on, for example, in the UK, like prisoner voting being an obvious example where
Okay.
there's a big debate over, obviously they lose kind of, you don't need to go into too much detail, but it's more the point that although the prisoners do
Yeah.
kind of retain their fundamental rights, it's not always clear what rights they lose just by the fact that they've lost their liberty, right? What's the kind of an obvious
Okay.
correlate of losing their liberty and what should be retained. So another example would be, it was very controversial case in the early 2000s about whether or not prisoners should be allowed to artificially inseminate their partners who are outside of prison so that they can have children.
Okay.
This is what I mean by these aren't necessarily super relevant to your argument, but it's more just to reflect the fact that some of the points you've made about like health and education are very like broad rights, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of reflecting that. So I think doing that a little bit in chapter one would be good. I think you're right though, that with the prisoners' rights point, you probably don't need a whole section on it. You can probably take that out. You probably just want a sentence kind of reiterating what you said in chapter one. So just kind of reminding your reader. So kind of saying, as discussed in chapter one, although prisoners have lost their freedom, they still retain kind of fundamental rights as protected by the Human Rights Act and the Prison Act, right?
Yeah.
Or prison rules, yeah.
Yeah.
So something like that. So I think that's right, that you can get rid of that and do it that way. And I think again, it was a kind of question I brought up a few times. Sorry, just because we're on this point, kind of throughout the comments was. In some places, I wasn't sure whether you'd gone into detail because I looked at the kind of plan you had for your first chapter.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how much you were repeating yourself.
Yeah.
And so if you are kind of repeating the same points, I would say try and keep it to like a sentence. So, you're just reminding the reader.
Okay.
Unless you're going into kind of more detail than you have previously about the rights or about the law. Does that make sense?
Okay, I got it.
You got it? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And all right. So for the prisoner rights, you will recommend me to mention it on the chapter one, or do you want me to do it on chapter two? Which one would you recommend?
So I think from what I can see from your chapter one framework, it sounds like in the first chapter, you're kind of setting out, okay, these are the kind of rights that apply to prisoners.
That's right.
And then your second chapter, which is about the impact of overcrowding on prisoner rights, is more about, okay, so we've given you a bit of background that this is the legislation, these are some of the things that the kind of rights provide. And now this chapter 2, should fundamentally be about, okay, this is what overcrowding means for those rights. So it's kind of saying, okay, we're going to take the principles we discussed in chapter 1 and see how overcrowding applies to it. And you do kind of start to get into that, but I think it's like 6 or 7 pages in before you kind of start really to discuss it in much depth.
Yeah.
And so I think what you probably need to do is have a read through and see what is the kind of background legal framework that your reader needs to know. Okay. And that probably needs to go in your chapter 1. And what is, you're taking the principles from chapter 1 and you're applying it to kind of overcrowding. And that would be kind of what your chapter 2 should really focus on. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Good.
Okay. And following on the the 5th command, like they seems to be jumping around. Do you think like if I should remove this part, like the legal framework part, or I just shorten it down, like to avoid making it too confused? Because this part is mainly about the impact, right? So all this is just a background information for people to know, like I'm going to explain something about the impact.
Yeah, so the legal framework part, I see where you're at, I think, like I say, a lot of that probably belongs in your kind of first chapter, where you're talking about, like, the Human Rights Act, where you're talking about Article 8, because what I'm kind of seeing at the moment, when I say it's kind of jumping around, is so you mention Article 8, and then you jump into talking about the Human Rights Act, and then the kind of Prisons Act, and I kind of got the sense of you're just giving me a very broad brush of the area, and I'm not sure what you're going to do with it, or what you're intending me to kind of take away from it. And I think it's probably because you were trying to kind of cram too much in. So I think probably those kind of things need to be discussed in chapter 1, of kind of saying, okay, these are the kind of rights that I'm going to use to kind of apply in my chapter 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes sense. So chapter 2, you would mainly want me to just more focus on the impact, right? Because I think in another comment I saw you say that you want each impact to be separated.
Yeah, so and again, later on you kind of did this a bit more. So it was in one of the kind of earlier sections, where was it? Where I've said, I think you need to take each theme in turn, health, education, and rehabilitation, and discuss the impact of overcrowding on each right. So I think there's 2 ways to do it, basically. You could either, if you have in your kind of chapter 1, okay, I'm going to discuss Article 3 of the ECHR, I'm going to discuss Article 8 of the ECHR, right? Those are the 2 main rights that I'm going to discuss. You could kind of split this chapter that way and say, okay, we're going to discuss, like, things that are relevant to Article 8 kind of problems, and then things that are relevant to Article 3 problems, although you'd still need to kind of do it thematically.
So
and you, you do kind of later on, because you, what's the sections you have called kind of later on? Let me look. So you have like effects of overcrowding. Effects of overcrowding on health and well-being. And then actually, that's all within that. And then you have right to education and rehabilitation. So that makes kind of more sense. So I put that comment earlier on because I hadn't read down kind of to that point, and I wasn't sure if that's all you were kind of going to talk about there. So I think you can take some of that kind of information from there. But I think it is about kind of referring back to the kind of rights quite clearly that you're applying, because for example, some of the right to health seems to really be coming under kind of the Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights concerns. Is that right? So I think just making that a bit clearer and kind of referring back. But I think where you've done it on kind of the right to health, so effects of overcrowding on health and well-being, and then you have sections. on physical and mental health impacts, and then access to medical care, and then you have right to education, rehabilitation, and you have barriers to education and the impact on rehabilitation. I think that's fine.
Okay.
Like as a way to kind of split it up.
Okay.
But then it's when you kind of come down and you have kind of Article 3 and human dignity, where it seems like a lot of the things that you were talking about in the kind of health section in particular, kind of
in the human dignity part, right?
Yeah, and so I think it's a case of just kind of linking those up a bit more.
Okay.
So like I say, it might be that you have a kind of section 1's going to discuss Article 3 kind of issues, and you can talk at the beginning a bit about how human dignity and kind of Article 3 are a problem, and how kind of Article 3 is partly kind of protected through kind of the health kind of provisions and the prison rules, right? And then you can get into, this is like the sections that you have there on the kind of access to medical care and on the poor mental and physical health impacts. Does that make sense? And then I'm not sure with rehabilitation and education, is that more Article 8?
Yeah, there's more Article 8.
Article 8. Yeah, and then that makes sense. And then have, again, a kind of, Section 2 is kind of on Article 8. Here's a bit about kind of Article 8 and prisoners. And then kind of go into, in depth, this is protected through the prison rules. This is what this means, kind of, yeah. Does that make sense? So it's restructuring a lot of what you've already got. Yeah.
So what you recommend me to change the structure is to mention the article, like different section, different article, and mention the right under the article, is it?
Yes, that's right, yeah. So discuss, yeah, absolutely. So to have like an Article 3 section, like a big section, kind of, yeah. Does that make sense? So it's restructuring a lot of what you've already got. Yeah.
So what you recommend me to change the structure is to mention the article, like different section, different article, and mention the right under the article, is it?
Yes, that's right, yeah. So discuss, yeah, absolutely. So to have like an Article 3 section, like a big section, and then you discuss kind of some of the stuff you talk about, human dignity and Article 3, and then you go into, so this is where the right to health is really relevant as protected by the prison rules, and then you go into the kind of sections you've already got on health. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And for the ninth command, the international legal instrument, that one, do you think I should remove the whole thing? Because I actually I was thinking about like this thing, like it wasn't really helpful in this part. Maybe I will just shorten it down, or do you think I should remove the whole thing for the 2.1.3?
That was the thing. When I was reading it, is I wasn't sure how relevant it didn't seem like a lot of these kind of things you were talking about were coming back out. So I think you could probably cut it down because it's not adding a lot to your analysis of it. Yeah.
Okay. So for the restructure part, you only recommend me to restructure the bottom part of the human dignity or the everything of the chapter 2? Like let's say Article 3, I just make it a big section and include like hold on, like the health, education, rehabilitation, all this under Article 3. Is it what you mean?
So what I would say is, I would restructure the whole chapter. The whole chapter.
Yeah.
But the way in which I would do that is I would kind of start with what you've got.
Okay.
So I would take your Article 3 kind of human dignity section, right, and kind of put that kind of after your kind of introduction bit, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and say, so one of the kind of major kind of issues with kind of overcrowding in prisons is Article 3. Article 3 has a lot of implications for human dignity, which is a big issue in prison, as you kind of discussed. And then I would put in, I would kind of link it to the health issues. So say that, the right to kind of health is a big issue under Article 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can link it through to your section, your current kind of Section 2, if that makes sense. Yeah. So where you've got the effects of overcrowding on health and well-being, and your 2.1 and your 2.2.
Yeah.
And then I would kind of stop there and I would kind of say, okay, another issue is Article 8, where right to education and rehabilitation are more important there. And I would link again, have a bit of a discussion of Article 8 and how it links to education and rehabilitation, and then in the prison rules, and then kind of link it. You again use your Section 3 there to kind of link it back to Article 8.
Okay. So mainly on the Chapter 2, like I'm just talking about the Article 3, Article 8, and also mention a little bit about the Prison Rules 1999. Is it?
Yeah, the prison rules 1999, because you can see that basically, so you can say that like they set out guidelines for like
so I can make it another section for prison rules 1999. So that
I don't think you need to have another section. I think what you can do is you can kind of say Article 3 is an issue for human dignity. The right to kind of healthcare issues are a big part of kind of Article 3 in prison, right? So you can say, okay, one of the ways in which the right to health is protected is, yes, through the Human Rights Act, but also through the kind of prison rules, which specifically set out a kind of right, what kind of rights, right? Sorry, too many uses of the word right there. So I don't think you need a separate section. I think you just need to be clear that kind of the prison rules also kind of tell us a bit about what the right to health looks like in the UK in prison. Yeah. And same with education and rehabilitation for Article 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would just main point the Article 3 and Article 8 on my Chapter 2. Like this is the main content for this chapter. Like is this what you mean, right? Yeah.
I think so. I mean, so you're basically saying like Article 3. I mean, that's the kind of the vibes that I got, because you're talking about human rights, right? So human rights are, the European Court of Human Rights, European Convention on Human Rights, and the Human Rights Act 1998 kind of should be the main framework, yeah.
And I got another question. Wait, hold on, Yanis. For my bottom part, after the starting from the 2.2, do you think like it is alright, the content, and like I just need more reference and relevant explanation for those, right?
Yeah, so as I was reading it, I think a lot of this is okay. Yeah, it's content. I think you just need to basically kind of explain a little bit more, put a bit more references, link things up a little bit more. I think the restructuring will help with kind of linking things through and giving a bit more critical kind of detail. So, for example, Section 3.1, barriers to educational programs. You talk about, for example, you say teacher shortages prevent inmates from attending educational programs. Many jails struggle to hire and retain good educators due to lack of trained instructors, difficult working conditions, and inadequate funds. And then you go on to say prison educational programs have long kind of enrollment queues. Some convicts finish their term without attending. These all need kind of references and just linking back a little bit to.
Okay, I got it.
To it, yeah.
Yeah. Just need more reference and more proof about all this statement I've mentioned.
Yeah, and because you're cutting words, because we said you're going to cut some of the stuff. Yeah. Some of these you could maybe go into a bit more explanation. So, and kind of explain the points more, or go into a little bit more detail kind of about it. So, for example, I think in section 2.32, there's a couple of points I kind of picked up on saying, I think you need to explain this in kind of a lot more detail. So, for example, especially Dixon against the UK, where the European Court of Human Rights recognised rehabilitation's broad scope to protect Article 8 rights. Like, obviously that seems really relevant to kind of making the case that this is a human rights issue. This isn't just that rehabilitation would be nice. This is a human rights issue. So some of the things like that could definitely do. You'd have more words to go into a bit more detail.
Okay, I understand. I got it.
Good.
Yes. And one last question is about the last section, which is the recommendation for enhancing. Like, will you recommend me to put it in another chapter, or should I just mention the short part in this chapter?
Well, when I looked at it, I thought that okay, kind of that is fine. But when I looked at your plan for your next chapter, it feels like it probably fits better in your chapter 3.
Yeah.
Because it's about the kind of future directions.
That's right.
So I think maybe moving that to chapter 3. So you could kind of say in your conclusion, that this chapter has kind of demonstrated all the ways in which overcrowding has impacted on kind of prisoners' rights. The next chapter will go on to consider, the ways in which kind of these problems could be mitigated or something like that, and then in your third chapter discuss it.
Okay, so for chapter 3, do you think my outline is alright? Because after amending my chapter 2, I think I would like to start with my chapter 3. But I'm just afraid that it will happen something like my chapter 2, which like 1 and 2, some information might be contradict to each other.
Can you think of what might contradict each other?
Because I think on my chapter 3, what I would like to mention is just like ways for it to solve the problems for prison overcrowding, like any other ways or any other action which the government can learn from other countries or take other countries as example, something like this.
So I think that's fine. So basically, with your chapters, your first chapter, you said, okay, here's the kind of framework of prisoners' rights.
That's right.
Chapter 2, you're saying, okay, here's how overcrowding, in particular, is a big problem for prisoners' rights. And then your chapter 3 is saying, okay, so now that we've shown you that this is not just a kind of problem, it's a kind of human rights problem, that gives us the kind of the depth you need to kind of try and fix overcrowding, right? And so, I mean, I think the sections make sense. What you might struggle to do is to fit it all in. But I think you're talking about the kind of current policies that will address overcrowding in the UK and why essentially they're not particularly good. And then you're going to compare to other European countries like Norway and take away lessons for the UK. And then you're going to talk about the roles played in this process by policymakers, particularly the judiciary when it comes to sentencing and civil society, and whether or not it seems like sentencing is kind of the key thing there, because you talk about impact of public opinion on sentencing reform, so whether or not that'll be plausible. And then you've got proposals for legislative reforms, proposals for investment, and ethical considerations, which I quite like. So the ethical kind of implications for overcrowding society. I think this is really good. I just think it's a lot of information, so you might struggle to get it all in. So you might have to pick one or the other. So you might have to for example, not do the comparative perspectives and focus more on the judiciary and sentencing reforms, for example.
Okay.
Right?
Because the comparative, I think in some of my topics, I mean on the chapter 1 and chapter 2, I think I've inserted some of the case where in some European countries, like how they do something like this. So maybe for 3.2 comparative, I can don't include it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for
It's up to you. Yeah.
for the chapter
Yeah.
for the chapter 3, would you like do you think like how many words is fine, like to make it more suitable?
Let's see. So, do you remember this document that you've sent me was about 3,000 words, but you've obviously got 2 plans in it.
Yeah.
So I think this is probably when you cut it down, because obviously you're going to cut some of the stuff.
Yeah.
I think this chapter 2, is probably going to be about 2,500 words.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
About, right. Do you remember how long your chapter 1 was, roughly?
My chapter 1 was around 3,000 or so.
3,000 words, okay. So that's 5,500 words.
Yeah.
So if you made your chapter 3 another kind of 3,000 word chapter, that would take us up to 8,500.
Yeah.
And then that gives you 1,500 words for your kind of introduction and your conclusion to the whole dissertation.
Yeah.
So I think aiming for around about 3,000 words, maybe you can go a little bit more, like 3,200.
Okay.
But I think that's probably about how long you can make your chapter 3. Yeah.
Okay, but would you suggest me to make chapter 2 more longer and more details? Because I think the main things about this prison overcrowding is on chapter 2, right? Which is the problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think I wouldn't. I think if you want to take, if you like, it's that's kind of the balancing act, right? Which is if you make your chapter 2 longer, then your chapter 3 can't be that long.
Yeah,
that's the kind of thing. So I think, I mean, if chapter 2 ended up being 3,000 words and chapter 3 was 2,500 words, I think that's fine as well. I don't think, as long as the chapters are kind of reasonably balanced, so you don't have like one chapter that's 1,000 words, one chapter that's 5,000 words, and another chapter that's like 1,000 words, then it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Thank you so much, Miss. I think I'm clear about this. I really appreciate for your feedback.
No problem.
Okay. Are you on your holiday soon, Miss?
Next week.
Oh, next week.
So it's my last day.
Oh, today is your last day.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll be back. Like when would you be back?
So I'll be back. I can't remember the exact date, but I'll be back kind of week after next.
Oh, okay.
But the university closes for
until end of the month, right?
It closes from, I'd have to double check the date. It closes from something like the 17th of April through to the 22nd or something like that.
Okay.
So, so I am around those weeks, but I'll only be working a couple of days.
Okay. No, I'm alright for that. Like if in the middle I have any question on my maybe chapter 2 or chapter 3, can I just write an email to you?
I'm fine for you to send me a question over email. I just can't look at kind of any more draft work.
Because I mainly am worried about my chapter 2 because I really feel that I have a lot of things keeping like repeating, but I don't know how should I amend. Yeah, so I mean like I will try to amend like in these few days, and I will try to work things out, and maybe I will send you a copy. And if you are free, like after you back from your holiday, maybe you can have a look on it. Is it possible?
I can't, I'm afraid. So we can't look at redrafted work. Yeah, we can only look at 5,000 words kind of total. So that counts. So you had Christina for the first one, and then
Okay. Alright, then I will try to work things out. And if I have any questions, I will just email you, Miss.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
All right. Well, good luck with it, and I hope you get a little bit of a break over the Easter holidays.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye, Miss. Thank you so much.
Bye.